Chapter 39, Found, Blonde Female Dog. Halloween came and went, and now Thanksgiving comes and goes. My father and Rain and I have a turkey dinner at Uncle Weldon's house. Over the weekend, I think a lot about the Hendersons. I decide that I must tell Mrs. Cushel the truth about Rain. So on Monday, I ask my uncle if he can drop me off at school early again. It's time for another private conversation with my teacher. I enter our classroom and find Mrs. Cushel working on a new bulletin board. She's tacking up large, colorful letters that spell holidays. "Good morning, Rose," she says. "Good morning," I reply, looking her in the eye. Mrs. Cushel steps off the chair she's been standing on. "Is there something you'd like to talk about?" she asks. "Did you bring the photo of the dog you found?" She asks 2 questions in a row. I answer the first one. "There is something I'd like to talk about." I sit at my desk and Mrs. Cushel sits next to me in Mrs. Liebler's chair. "I have to tell you something," I say. "I have to tell you the truth." Mrs. Cushel smiles at me, which is a sign of encouragement. "The truth is that the lost dog is Rain." Mrs. Cushel's smile turns to a frown. "I don't understand." I tell my teacher the whole story of Rain, starting from the night my father brought her home and said we couldn't look for her owners if she didn't have any identification. "So Rain is back," I finish up, "but she isn't my dog, and we have to find her real owners, the Hendersons, who used to live in Gloverston, whose house got ruined, and who might be living nearby with relatives." Just like Uncle Weldon, Mrs. Cushel says to me, "Oh, Rose, are you sure?" I nod my head. Yes, I am sure. It's the right thing to do. Happy Tails is looking for her owner, too. Mrs. Cushel frowns again and taps a pencil on the edge of my desk. This is an indication that she's thinking. She says, "I have an idea. Instead of placing an ad in the paper, maybe someone could write an article. An article would get a lot of attention, certainly more attention than a little ad." "I'll have to ask your father for permission, of course," Mrs. Cushel continues. She sounds as though she's talking to herself. "Then I'll call a friend of mine, Sheila Perlman, who's a writer. She'll write a good story, and it would probably be picked up by lots of the local papers. How do you feel about this, Rose?" "I feel that it's a good idea. I'll call your father tonight." "Maybe you should call him in the afternoon," I say. I wonder why she says that. I wonder why she's asking him to call in the afternoon instead of the evening. I'm thinking of all the time my father has been spending at the Luck of the Irish lately. There's some text evidence for what your thought might have been. The earlier she talks to him, the less chance there is that he will have had a drink already. There's our answer. "Deal," says Mrs. Cushel. 3 days later, I arrive at school wearing the same dress I wore on school picture day. My hair is brushed and Uncle Weldon tied a ribbon in it. When it's time for recess, my classmates leave the cafeteria and run to the playground, while Mrs. Cushel and I walk back to our room. Waiting there is a woman wearing a blue wool jacket and matching blue wool pants. Her face looks serious, but when she sees me, she smiles. "Rose," says Mrs. Cushel. "Meet Mrs. Perlman. She's the writer. Mrs. Perlman, this is Rose Howard." Mrs. Perlman stretches out her hand, and I know I'm supposed to shake it, which I do. "Well," says my teacher, "shall we get down to business?" Mrs. Perlman opens a laptop computer. She starts asking me questions about Rain, about when my father brought her home, about how we lost her and how we found her. And then more questions about what happened after we located her at Happy Tails. I give her a photo of Rain that Uncle Weldon took with his digital camera. Mrs. Perlman looks at the photo, looks at me, looks at the photo again, and when she glances at me a second time, I think I see tears in her eyes. "This is a very brave and selfless thing that you're doing, Rose," she says, "giving up the dog you love so that her proper owners can be reunited with her." I nod. Maybe I'm supposed to say thank you. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. When I say nothing, Mrs. Perlman says to Mrs. Cushel, "At the end of the article, we'll include a contact number, a number at the Hatford Herald that people can call if they have any information about Rain or the Hendersons. That way, Rose's personal information will remain private." Mrs. Cushel nods. "I'll explain that to Rose's She pauses. I think I'll explain it to her uncle when he picks her up today. Mrs. Perlman turns to me and smiles. That about wraps things up. Thank you very much, Rose. You're very welcome, Miss Perlman, I reply, and I stick out my hand so that she can shake it again. Why do you think she decided to talk to Uncle instead of Dad?